Hello, you beautiful people. Aaron here, back with another video. You know Baizhu, you know Kale. What if we combine them together and...
reuse.
Kirara! Wait, no. But before we hop right into talking about Ikiki, I just want to say that if you like my content, why not take a bite out of that icebox cookie-flavored subscribe button. Also note that chapters are in the description for you all to peruse at your leisure. Now let's start first with the question of, what does Ikiki do? Ikiki is a dendro shield support unit that has some driving potential. Her skill has a tap and hold version, with each one summoning a stackable shield on cast, and with a base skill cooldown of 8 seconds, while the shield lasts 12 seconds. Her tap version just deals damage and generates 3 particles. Her hold version has her enter a box that allows her to move faster, climb up walls faster at the cost of increased stamina reduction. It deals damage to all those she comes into contact with and can hit opponents once every 0.5 seconds. It applies dendro at a normal amount of once every 2.5 seconds or once every 3 hits, which would be once every 1.5 seconds, and it generates 1 extra dendro particle once every 4 seconds. The longer Ikiki is in her skill's state, the longer the cooldown will be, up to a max of 12 seconds. After the duration ends, or if it is cancelled, she will kick and deal dendro damage to enemies, which will also generate 3 particles. Then there's her burst, which is very similar to that of a Yan phase charge attack, but with Klee's skills bombs that spawn afterward. The only interesting part about her burst is that the bombs left behind can be moved around by characters like Kazuha and Venti, but that's it. This does nothing else other than damage. Her first ascension passive allows her hold skill's box state to grant another shield equal to 20% the shield strength of her normal shield to herself once every 0.5 seconds when she hits an enemy with it. This can occur up to 3 times. Her shield does have a cap in max shield strength, but that only matters in co-op when using multiple of her. This is because her first ascension passive can get her to the cap when it is at max stacks. Her Stage 4 passive simply increases the percent damage bonus of her skill and burst by 0.4% and 0.3% respectively for every 1000 HP she has. Ikiki reminds me a lot of Layla in a way. Both of their primary uses are as elemental shielders originating from their skill while also having some DPS capabilities with their burst. Their ascension passives also increase their tankiness from the first one, and their fourth grants them HP scaling for their damage. They are also incredibly self-sufficient when it comes to energy generation, and they're easy to build in the stat department. Oddly enough, they both also have spikes in utility at C4. So by all means, I think it's a safe idea to think of Ikiki as just a dendro version of Layla. Onto combos, where the most optimal way to use her is to activate her hold skill into the enemy and then cancel it. This is to easily get the most burst damage off, to generate the most energy, and to get the fattest shield as quickly as possible. However, there is also the option of waiting in her skill to hit 3 times, which will generate her max shield. This doesn't take too much extra time to do and is very good to start rotations off with, but comes at the cost of a slightly longer cooldown of her skill. After that though, you just want to use her burst. For her talent priority on a more supportive Ikiki, the best you could ask for is to max out that shield on her skill first, then go for her burst for that extra bit of burst damage and ignore her normal attacks. Since her burst damage isn't too bad in quicken teams, and especially at higher constellations, there's also the option to build her as more of a DPS unit. Here you're looking to level her burst first and then skill while still ignoring her normal attacks. Now onto her constellations and their values, starting with her first. This first constellation is pretty okay. It grants her more bombs left over from her burst based on her max HP up to a max of 4. This bonus caps out at 32,000 HP, which can be achieved with just 2 HP% main stat artifacts. It is also capable of granting 2 more dendro applications at a minimum, which is pretty powerful. On top of that, it increases her damage potential by a pretty sizable amount and is her second best constellation damage-wise. On the other hand, her second constellation is very bad. It allows her to grant shields to allies in co-op by running into them, but that's all it does. While it does offer her some good supportive utility and potential minigame antics for co-op, in terms of power level, this constellation is useless. Next up is her third constellation. Damage-wise, this constellation is rather pointless. However, for her shield, it's quite the monster, as it increases its effectiveness by a sizable 20%. This is definitely one of her more important constellations, especially when it comes to protecting her team. Her fourth constellation is her best, since it opens up her team availability by providing her with some off-field dendro application. While this application is very slow, it does have a decent AoE. This constellation makes her a very strong pick in quicken teams that don't need fast dendro application. This constellation also provides a sizable damage increase of about 28%. Her C5, on the other hand, is very underwhelming. Her damage isn't huge as is, and this constellation increases it by a mere 5%. Some constellations for characters are nothing to scoff at. This one, however, is. Her final constellation contends with her fourth. This constellation is really strong, as it increases every party member's percent damage bonus by 12%, leading to a total team percent damage bonus bonus of 48%. While it increases her own damage output by a mere 4.5%, it does put her on par with Yao Yao's C1 in terms of buffing the main DPS. However, since this impacts her entire team, it pairs very well with off-field DPS characters like Fischl and Beidou for Aggravate, or for characters like Ayato and Mona for Bloom teams. In general, at C6, she's going to be about on par with Baizhu in more amplifying reaction damage-oriented teams. All around, her constellations are pretty solid, with the two main features being her C4, which opens up more opportunities for her, and her C6, which amplifies her supportive potential. However, this poses a problem for her, as before C4 and after C4 are two completely different units. So with this in mind, I'm going to consider pre-C4 Ikiki as a different unit to post-C4 Ikiki. This means that I have to clarify what's unique between these two characters before we continue. These key differences being their dendro application and damage output. Before C4, Ikiki has to rely on her taxi form to apply dendro to multiple enemies. This is pretty detrimental, as she has to be on field in order to do her job. It also means that she cannot utilize normal attack rocking units like Xingqiu or Beidou while she's on field. This hinders her team comp versatility quite a bit, but not enough to make her useless, as she could still be used as a tanky substitute driver in Bloom-related teams if another one is not available. Her damage at lower constellations is also rather low, making her work better as a shield bot than DPS. However, because her potential peaks at around 32,000 HP, focusing on other stats like EM for Nilo or Fridge teams, or energy recharge for noblesse buffing is a very good idea. After C4, this changes as her damage is pretty good as a sub-DPS burst unit. Along with this, her C3 also has increased her base shield strength, lessening her need for HP. This means that instead of building her as a full shield support, more stats can be better focused towards a sub-DPS playstyle. With all this in mind, let's continue on first into the artifacts department. Since Ikiki relies so little on stats to function at a base level, she will rely much more on the set bonus she has to do what needs to be done. Before C4, a very safe and solid option for driver Ikiki is Tenacity of the Millilith, or Deepwood Memories, which both grant her damage scaling and utility for almost every situation. Depending on the scenario, she has even more options. In Nilo teams, Instructors, the Falafel, and Gilded Dream sets are all viable options. When driving other compositions, Instructors is a fantastic option since she'll be the one proccing the Bloom Seed reactions. However, Tenacity will still work here too. In situations like these, you're looking to go HP, attack, HP percent, and HP percent, or crit rate if you're running Fav. You can also substitute any of these with Elemental Mastery if you're relying on her to deal Bloom damage. Substats would also just be up to you, but if you want consistent burst uptime, about 180% energy recharge will do. After C4, things get a little different. Noblesse ends up becoming a crazy good option for herself to scale with, and to buff her team, especially when buffing aggravate focused team compositions. You could still use more of a shield bot focus build on her here, but the option to switch it up to DPS is there too. In this case, crit would definitely go on the circlet, and dendro damage would go on the goblet. However, she would still need that 180% energy recharge and 32,000 HP for her C1 and decent shield functionality. For substats, you're mostly looking for a good 1-to-2 crit ratio. Depending on the weapon option, this can float anywhere between 50 to 70% crit rate and 100 to 140% crit damage. Now onto weapons, where Ikiki has some solid options. Since she could get most of her shield's effectiveness simply from two main stats, she doesn't rely on weapons as much as other characters would. Instead, her best weapon options would be those that provide utility. These would include weapons like Favonia's Sword, Sapwood Blade, the Key of Kashnasut, Xiphos' Moonlight when building into Elemental Mastery, and Freedom Sworn. There's also Sacrificial Sword, which, since Ikiki's shield can stack, might possibly be able to net her a full shield when casting a skill twice. I'm unsure if this will actually work, but I'm assuming it can, since they tried nerfing the double skill cast with her from the cooldown timer on her energy generation. This means that with this weapon, you would only be able to generate 7 particles instead of 8. If Sacrificial Sword does enable her to max out her shield in this manner, then this would be her best supportive stat stick. Otherwise, every other weapon works well depending on the situation. If you're looking for best options, I would say Fav Sword is first, with the Key of Kashnasut and Freedom Sworn being very valuable alternatives. But if you're looking for damage, most of the weapons are going to average at about the same. There are those that are best to worst, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to matter too much. Fav Sword is also going to be up towards the top, so I would recommend keeping with Fav Sword if you want more damage. Now let's move on to the tricky part, which is her team compositions. Before C4, she has to rely on her on-field driving potential for most of her relevancy. The good thing is, since she can proc a dendro once every 1.5 seconds, she can keep a constant dendro aura up on a target. On top of this, she also has the defensive utility from her dendro shield, which is much more effective against dendro damage sources, including Bloom-related reactions. This means that she would excel in Nilo teams that need a defensive unit and want to keep the dendro dendro aura up. However, this is all she provides to Nilo teams, which can be fulfilled to a similar degree by using Yao Yao, who is free to play once a year at Lantern Right and offers both on-field and off-field healing when she herself is on and off-field, by using Baizhu, who defends and buffs his team's dendro reaction damage, Barbara, who's a free unit and can full heal when she needs to, or Kokomi, who applies a great amount of hydro and has some incredible healing too. There's also the free-to-play Kole, who can actually work pretty well in front-loading dendro application with Sacrificial Bow. A similar thing can be said for Fridge teams, as there are other free-to-play options that work similarly well to her. However, in terms of high amounts of constant dendro application, only Nahida and Alhaitham can hold a candle to her, which makes Ikiki a very valuable free-to-play pickup for these teams. However, she can't normal attack while driving, which completely cuts Jingshou out of the team, who can't be replaced so easily. The same can be said for Hyperbloom Virgin teams. Jingshou and Yalan are so powerful here that having to lose them for a bit more defensive utility is generally not worth it, especially when characters like Jingshou and Kuki Shinobu already provide some amazing defensive utility. The problems she has here aren't remedied by her later Constellations too, as her C4 doesn't help her with her driving potential, and it's not enough application to keep the blooms coming. Plus, her C6 isn't as useful in teams that focus mostly on transformative reactions. Where these two Constellations really pop off is in Quicken teams, specifically with Aggravate. In Aggravate teams, she serves a similar function to that of Baizhu. In fact, in comps where you might struggle to keep Baiju's reaction buff up on allies, Ikiki can be a better option if you don't mind the slower off-field application. This would be a similar case for spread reaction teams. She also has the possibility of being a better user of the Deepwood set because of her larger AoEs. This can make her a better unit than most others for spread teams when she can run this set. Otherwise, she's just a better version of Baizhu if your team comp focuses on team damage. This actually brings me to the comparison between her and Baizhu, as they work best in similar roles. Baizhu tends to work as an all-rounder defensive buffing support that can work with all dendro teams. However, he doesn't excel over other supports, especially when buffing aggravate-focused units. With Ikiki working similarly to him, the question becomes which one is better. Baizhu has faster dendro application, but in a smaller area, making him relatively single-target focused. His defensive utility allows him to not only deflect some blows, but also make up for mistakes made. He also has a strong buff that can be applied to multiple party members, though it may be hard and requires a quick swap focus comp. With Thrilling Tales of the Dragon Slayer, he also has the potential to super buff another unit to set them up as a hyper carry. However, Baizhu has a major stat requirement problem that prevents him from running anything other than energy recharge and HP. On the other hand, a C6 Ikiki doesn't have these issues, which allows her to utilize more damage-oriented builds and deal more damage than Baizhu can. On top of this, she comes with a very strong shield to prevent damage from being taken, as well as much more AoE dendro application. While most of it is front-loaded, the fact that it can persist on the ground and the fact that it can be moved to wherever necessary is pretty powerful. Downside to this is that her application is slower than Baiju's, but since the Quicken Aura lasts a long time, this doesn't matter too much. Her buff is also worse than Baiju's for a single target when considering Thrilling Tales, the Dragon Slayer. However, with just Noblesse and her C6, she nearly matches his damage buffing capabilities, as Baizhu is ahead of her team DPS-wise by a mere 3.2%. When considering she does a decent amount of damage herself, and when she's using a damage buffing weapon like Sapwood, Yevkashnosut, or Freedom Sword, she could stand ahead of Baizhu in terms of overall team damage output. However, she also doesn't have the option to defend her team as well as Baizhu can, since he can fully heal everyone. Though, who's better? Well, it mostly relies on how much vertical investment you have into your Ikiki. Without much into her, Baizhu is better, but if you plan to deck her out, Ikiki will be the superior pick. So how does Ikiki look? Well, in terms of ease of use, I can see her being a little frustrating for some people as they try to utilize her in combat. However, she does appear to be a very safe pick that doesn't require too much from the player to get the most out of. Therefore, I will have to give her a 3 here. In terms of utility, she doesn't have much. She has some good front-loaded dendro application and a decent shield, but that's about it. So I'll have to give her a 2 out of 5 for C4. However, once at C4, she gets some off-field dendro application, which is incredibly valuable and opens up her usefulness in many team compositions. When at C6, she increases everyone's percent damage bonus by 12%, which is also very valuable. So once at C6, I'm going to give her a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Damage-wise, she doesn't do too much without Quicken. Since she struggles at supporting this reaction before C4, she's not going to be dealing any sort of damage. So I'm going to give her a 1.5 out of 5 for damage output. However, after C4, she can solo support Quicken teams, which then also allows her to build a good amount of damage. At this point, her damage increases by over double, while still retaining a pretty strong shield. So once at C4, I'll consider her off-field damage as a 3.5 out of 5. Then there's her versatility, which also changes with Constellations, but not by much. While she is not the best in a lot of scenarios, the only spots she will actually struggle in is with traditional Hyperbloom and Birchen compositions. Otherwise, she can work in every other spot, just not better than most others that she competes with. So I'm going to have to give her a 3.5 out of 5 here too. With all that said, before C4, I'm going to have to give Ikiki a 2.5 out of 5 stars due to her lack of utility and damage, plus the fact that she doesn't work well with strong hydro enablers like Jingshou. But once at C4 and beyond, I'm going to have to give her a 3.5 out of 5 since she gets so much more damage, application, and versatility from her later constellations. But this is where I pass the conversation along to you. What do you think of Ikiki? Do you think she's better than I think? Do you think she's worse? Tell me your thoughts in the comments down below. But with that, I will get out of your hair. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you all next time. Bye bye.